Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So hello everyone and welcome to Basics Discussion Circle and Meditation. My name is Travis, I facilitate this group. So I think for today, unless anyone has any requests for a type of meditation, if you want to type that in the live chat, I think we'll do maybe I don't know if y'all remember, but there was a meditation we did where we kind of imagined the body being like a vase and the breath slowly fills the body like drops of water fill a vase. I haven't done that one in like 6 months, so maybe we could do that, or if you guys have a preference, feel free to leave that there. Yeah. So we'll get started. Yeah. We'll get started. If you have a suggestion, go ahead and leave it. If you have any kind of any idea for what I should talk about afterwards, go ahead and leave that. And yeah, so we'll get started. A few things before we get started. If you're sitting in a chair, it's helpful to have feet flat on the ground. It really kind of anchors you in the moment. If you're sitting in a chair as well, it's best not to fully utilize the backrest if possible, because you're less likely to fall asleep if you don't utilize the backrest. I like to kind of bring my shoulders up, like really up and back, and then let them drop into a really sturdy posture. You can imagine a string pulling the tip of the head up, straightening everything out. If you're sitting on a cushion, you most likely have a cushion at home, so hopefully you know how to sit. The only thing with that, if you're new to sitting on a cushion, is it can be helpful to sit on the forward third of the cushion and to never, if you're new to sitting on a cushion, it can be helpful to, instead of crossing the legs, to have them one in front of the other. I believe it's called Bali style. And it helps a lot with circulation if your legs tend to fall asleep while meditating. Because that's not necessarily ideal when we're trying to have full body awareness and half our body is numb. So yeah. And in terms, that's physical posture. In terms of mental posture, it's important to approach the meditation with an attitude of we're doing it because it's good for us. Like keeping in mind the reason we're doing this. So oftentimes, especially when we have a daily meditation practice, it can become kind of tedium, and it becomes something we do simply because we do it. Like we brush our teeth because that's what you do. You brush your teeth every day. You meditate because that's what you do. You meditate every day. But if you come with that kind of habitual approach to it, it's not necessarily the best mind state to be in coming into the meditation. But if you come into the meditation reaffirming your intention for why you started meditating, reaffirming your intention for this particular session, then it puts our mind, after we get the body in position, that kind of helps put our mind into position. And know throughout the meditation, the mind will wander. That's the nature of the mind. The mind's not going to stop straying out from thought to thought. And we don't really want it to stop straying out to thought. the mind's not going to stop wandering any more than the lungs are going to stop breathing or the heart's going to stop beating, hopefully. So one of the beautiful things about when the mind wanders is that's actually one of the biggest opportunities for practice. We're learning this pattern of the mind wandering. We're learning when we interrupt this pattern, the mind kind of shows itself more prominently. We get to know our own mind better, right? So when we have these thoughts arising and we want to, and there's that desire to wander out and go ahead and greet them and interact with them and create this big old tangled mess while we're sitting here, if we can recognize that we've begun to do that and we can cut it, we can relax the forehead, the shoulders, we can relax back into the body, back into present moment, an interesting thing happens, and that's that the mind gets challenged. It was doing, for however many years we've been alive, it's just been doing whatever the heck it wants, whenever it wants. And now it's being marshaled a bit. And we can learn from that, and we can see what the mind does when it's confronted with something it doesn't like. Because when we're out in the world and we get confronted with something we don't like, we get too swept up into it to really notice what the mind's doing most of the time. But when we're taking the role of observer and we're cutting off something that the mind wants to think about, we get to actually see what happens to the mind, not really our mind, but to the mind, when something gets cut off. And it's the same kind of process, the same causal reaction that happens when we're out in the world and something unpleasant happens and we feel cut off. We feel like what we wanted to do gets cut off from us. It's the exact same process. When we order a sandwich and they put mayonnaise on it and we don't like mayonnaise, same process. Yeah. So that's why it's actually beneficial when the mind wanders. It gives us a chance to work with the mind and work with seeing how it reacts to things that are unpleasant. And then when we see how it reacts, we can kind of deconstruct that a bit. So that when we're out in the world and something unpleasant happens and we start to feel not so great about it, we can kind of reference our meditation practice and be like, well, when the mind did this, when the mind had this kind of reaction and I breathed in this way, or I changed my perception in this way, that seemed to help. Maybe that will help now. And pretty good chances that it will help, because again, it's the same process either way. Whether it's the mind off on its own or it's us joined in with the mind being not okay with something. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's about it for instruction. We'll get started. The mind may wander 10 times, 100 times, 1,000,000 times. And that's perfectly fine. Just whenever you notice when the mind's wandered, whether it's right away or it's 20 trillion thought rotations into that one thought you had, either way is fine. Just once you've noticed it, bring attention, awareness back to body, back to breath, back to sensation. And keep that forehead and those shoulders relaxed. There's no need to be too serious with this practice. That's pretty much it. Let's get started. Closing the eyes and slowly taking 3 deep breaths. Just noticing if deep breathing feels good for the body. If it does, you can maintain it. If it doesn't, you can switch things up. Maybe even deeper still or more shallow, heavier or lighter. In long, out short, or in short, out long. This kind of conscious experimenting with the breath is really valuable. Learning how to change up its rhythm and texture. It gives insight in how the mind processes sensation. But if it seems like too much right now, you can just pose the question in the mind as to what kind of breathing would feel the best in this moment. Either the most energizing or the most calming. And then just watch how the body responds. Once you've really settled into a rhythm and texture of breathing, you can try to hold in mind the image of the body being hollow, like a vase. And as you breathe in, the breath flows in like water, all the way down to the tips of the toes. And as you breathe out, that breath settles in the toes. Slowly filling this vase bit by bit with each breath. Filling this body with this breath awareness. Breathing in, the breath flows down through the body. Filling the body up to the waist. Breathing out, it settles into the body, into this body-shaped base. Breathing in, breath awareness fills this body all the way up to the shoulders, flowing down the arms as well, filling the arms. Breathing in, filling this body, this vase-like body with breath awareness, all the way up to the crown of the head. And once you reach the crown of the head, you can allow this breath awareness to flow over the crown of the head. Just as when you fill a vase to its brim, it overflows. And you can allow this breath awareness or hold the image in mind of it flowing down the surface of the body. All the way down to the floor with each in-breath and each out-breath. With the body suffused with the breath, inside and out, you can slowly begin to open the eyes and stretch if necessary. Never in a rush to leave the meditation. Taking the next few moments in silence to reflect back on that past session and recall if there was any point where you felt particularly calm and centered, particularly focused. And then reflect back to what you were doing just prior to that state of mind arising. And make a mental note of it for later. See if that cause yields a similar effect at another time. In this way, meditation can become a skill. We can learn upon past sessions and build upon them, and apply what we learn not only to the meditation, but to our interactions throughout our day and throughout our lives. I haven't led that meditation in a while, and I also haven't done it in that way in a while. It felt pretty good. One of the things I really enjoy about this method, which really it is just breath meditation with a visual anchor, which is most of what I lead, is breath meditation with a visual anchor. Just different visual anchors, because you never know what might really make it click for someone. What I really like about this particular image of the body being this vase, and I do think it's easier to have an image of that when you're like seated on a cushion, because it's almost like you're almost like the shape of a vase, you know? But what's interesting about it is it slowly builds up internal awareness and slowly suffuses the body with internal awareness until you get to the brim. But it doesn't just keep that awareness completely internal. Oftentimes, if we fill the body with the breath, but we don't ever release it, we can start to get dizzy or headaches or things like that. But with this visual anchor, it's very natural to think that when the breath awareness, the breath energy, whatever you want to call it, when it reaches its peak, of course, it's just going to naturally flow out, because we're like a vase. The vase doesn't have an infinite amount of water stored within it. It has a limit. Once that limit's reached, the vase doesn't break. The water just starts overflowing. And in that way, you can build up a really solid internal awareness of the breath. An awareness that seeps down into your core, or into an imagined core of the body. But then also lightly passes over the surface of the body. It's kind of an all-around awareness. So I really enjoy that about it. If anyone would like to share how that experience of meditation was for them, or if you have any questions on Buddhist practice in general, on this meditation in particular, or if you have any suggestions on a topic you'd like me to talk about, any of that, I'm all ears. A few things to mention with this meditation, and I like to kind of touch on this every once in a while. When I'm giving guided instruction, there's a lot of different ways that the instruction could be given, right? And different people will find different ways of visualizing the same type of visual anchor more helpful than others. So someone may have found it particularly tedious going through, like hard to focus, going through small increments of the body over time with each breath. A few different ways that I could see doing this meditation if you try it on your own and want to experiment along with whatever ideas you come up with. One thing is, instead of imagining the breath, and I didn't really mention this because it's kind of complicated in general if you've never done this meditation before, but instead of imagining the breath coming in and out through the nose, I imagine that the breath is more of water flowing down into the top of the head, down through the body, slowly filling it. So that hole that the breath starts to overflow from near the end of the meditation is kind of already there in thought. So it's more of a natural transition. Another alteration that I could see being useful, and I tried it for a few breaths at the end, was instead of filling the body up incrementally bit by bit with each in-breath, was to imagine that with each in-breath, the entire body was filled from the tips of the toes all the way up. And then with each out-breath, all of that accumulated breath overflowed down the body over and over. That was a lot more dynamic. So if you were trying to do this meditation and it was making you sleepy, shifting to that more of a dynamic way of doing the same meditation, breathing in, filling the entire body all the way up, breathing out, allowing the entire awareness to overflow, was more energizing. And it's important to experiment with the instructions, experiment with the rhythm of the instructions, and experiment with the medium of visualization. And as I always mention whenever I'm talking about visualization within meditation practice doesn't mean imagining that you're checking out and floating down the river and looking at all these beautiful things. Visualization is a tool that's used to reference present moment awareness. So it's not something that we use to check out. It's something that we use to check in, to anchor our awareness visually to the task that we're attempting to do. So with this, the visualization is imagining a vase being filled with water, but we're not just imagining a vase being filled with water, we're corresponding that to our body being filled with breath. So visualization and creativity with what we're visualizing to focus on breath or focus on loving kindness is wonderful. But don't let the visualization itself become the only aspect of the meditation. It still has to correspond to what's happening either in the body or in the mind for it to really be beneficial. Sherry shared, I liked the visual anchor. Weirdly, I wanted something thicker than water, and I thought of buttermilk. That made me think of my grandpa. he introduced me to it, and then I was sad because I miss him. Lots of things can come up during the meditation. I'm sorry to hear that it brought some stuff up for you, but that can also be very beneficial. When those kinds of things come up in the meditation, if we can soften a bit, relax a bit into them, it gives space for that and for us to develop a new relationship with those feelings. I'll share. I haven't shared this for a while, so I'll share it again, but I'll talk about it often when we do forgiveness meditation, that I had an experience where I was meditating and memories of grief about my grandfather came up. He passed away when I was about 10. And as you know, when something happens when we're much younger, we don't really grieve it. We don't really process the grief necessarily. So the grief gets put on a shelf until we're old enough to understand what it is. And then it's our future self's problem. So I was sitting with it. And normally when grief about my grandfather came up, because it would always feel very fresh because it was never originally processed. And so it came up. And normally when that would come up, because it's very intense, I would get up and I would go do something else. I would distract myself from it. And I did that for years whenever that kind of stuff came up in the meditation. But then eventually I got to a place with it where I had more tools to work with it. And so even though I really wanted to get up, the fun catalyst was that I was leading a meditation. So I couldn't just get up. It was a silent meditation, so I didn't have to give a talk afterward, thank God. But it was one of their silent morning meditations. So I couldn't just get up and leave because someone has to hit the bell to let people know when it's over. So what happened is those emotions came up. They were very intense. And because I've been doing this practice for 5 years at that point, probably about 5 years at that point, I noticed how much I was tensing up, clamping down, and constricting around that feeling. Almost kind of like a dangerous person just burst into the room and they had to be restrained. That was the kind of feeling that comes up, like this emotion isn't a comfortable emotion, it needs to be restrained. It needs to be restrained so it can't cause further harm. But the thing is, it's that act of restraining, that act of tensing up around it and trying to restrain it is what's causing the harm. The feeling itself, if given space, if treated with kindness, if softened into, doesn't actually have any fangs to bear. But it bears its fangs when we try to constrict it, restrict it, repress it. So what was really interesting is when we're sitting in meditation and we have something like this come up, it's incredibly beneficial, and it's beautiful and in a sense almost lucky that it came up during meditation. It's better that it comes up during meditation than when we're driving home or anything like that, or we're on the train or something. So it's actually beautiful and beneficial when it arises during the meditation, because it gives us time to sit with it, soften into it, and allow it to transform into what it really wants to be, instead of being constrained by what we're afraid it might become. And typically when those kind of things come up, what it really wants to be is fondness. But we're so afraid of experiencing the grief that we don't allow for the full experience of fondness to arise. So it's a really interesting experience. To sum it up, because I don't want to stay on it too long, but when I had softened into it, the energy would get more and more intense, and I started to soften into it, and it almost felt like almost deafening at a point, but then it started to quiet. And then because I softened into it completely, it was gone. It wasn't like when something comes into the mind, we don't notice it arising. We kind of notice the thought after it's already there. And we don't notice the thought fading away. We notice it after it's already gone. We notice that it's not there anymore. But this was interesting of actually seeing it, seeing the grief and the pain and all of that almost disintegrate in that moment, almost unravel in that moment. And later I understood that what that was me watching an emotion being processed, watching a trauma being processed in real time. And it was incredibly liberating and deeply fascinating to watch, because it's a direct insight into one of the strongest presences in the mind of trauma, and to see how we can work with it, soften into it, and allow it to transform. And for years, it would bring up trauma when I would think of my grandfather. Now it brings up fondness. There's no sadness, no grief associated with it, because it was processed, and that was pretty cool. So yeah, Sherry shared that it was a happy sad because it was also nice to have that memory. Yeah, it is pretty nice. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share or anything like that? Oh, and the only other thing I'll say about that is I might make it sound like exciting or really simple, but know where you're at in your practice. Be aware of where you're at in your practice and what you're capable of doing. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Don't try to push yourself. The Buddha talks a lot about right effort or balanced effort. And basically, in essence, what it is the image that he often gives is of he uses a lute, but you can think of it as a guitar or bass, or whatever string instrument you prefer. If you tighten the strings too much, the strings will snap. If you don't tighten them enough, no sound will be played. So this balanced effort is about recognizing where we're at in our practice, recognizing what we are and are not capable of in this moment, and being able to be gentle with ourselves and applying only the amount of effort that is necessary to be beneficial. If we push ourselves too hard, we can snap our strings. If we don't put any effort in, we don't move forward. So it's about finding that balance and being realistic with yourself. So as I mentioned in that story, it was about 5 years into my practice before I started really confronting the heavy traumas that would arise. Before that, if a heavy trauma arose during meditation, I would, like I said, get up, go do something else, read a book, watch a cartoon, anything to shift where the mind went, which isn't unskillful. It's actually quite skillful to recognize when the mind's entering a place that we're just not equipped to deal with, and being able to redirect awareness and attention to something else to kind of cut that off. But when we're eventually, when we're ready, when these things arise during the meditation, don't go out seeking them. They'll come up when they need to come up. And then we can work with them, but never be in a rush. It's safer to err on the side of the strings being slightly loose than a little too tight. So, yeah. Roberto, just thank you. Nothing to add today. Thank you, Roberto. It's good to see you. Hopefully, I'll be seeing y'all soon here. things are looking up. So yeah, I think with that we will close. Sherry, that is such an important reminder to give oneself grace. We've got to be kind to ourselves. If we won't, who will? So yeah. With that, we will close. If comfortable, please join palms for a dedication of merit. May any merit gained from today's meditation and discussion be dedicated to all those who suffer at this time. May all beings in all directions, without limit or exception, be healthy, safe, joyful, and at ease. May we all be healthy, safe, joyful, and at ease. Metta karuna mudita upekha sahanga teya cetasa chaturi sambharatva viharati sambhavudharupavena sambadhammarupavena sambasangharupavena sote hantu nirantaram. I'll see y'all next week. Bye now.